My in-laws invited me to a high-end restaurant for my birthday. I arrived, but the room was empty. On the table sat a divorce document which was already signed and a note which read, "Happy birthday, impotent threat. You can enjoy in pain." They had no idea what was coming next. Hello. Thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout-out in our next story. Today's special shout-out goes to Julie from Red Oak, Texas. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's dive into the details of today's story. I sat at my desk in the quiet of our suburban Boston home, the faint scratch of my pencil against the sketchbook filling the silence. The room smelled of graphite and old paper, a familiar comfort, but today it felt heavy, like the air itself carried the weight of unspoken words. Outside, the late afternoon sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the Maplewood district, its golden light catching the edges of my half-finished illustration, a whimsical forest scene for a children's book. I traced the curve of a tree trunk, my fingers lingering on the rough texture of the paper, but my mind drifted, as it often did, to the life I'd once dreamed of, a life that now seemed as distant as the stars I used to sketch with Rebecca by my side. We'd met in college, in an art and literature club, our voices overlapping as we debated the merits of Van Gogh's brushstrokes and Austen's prose. I remembered her laugh, sharp and bright, like the chime of a bell, as we promised to travel the world, sketchbooks and novels in hand. She'd been a law student then, her auburn hair falling in waves over her shoulders, her eyes alight with ambition. I'd been an art major, my hands stained with charcoal, my dreams as wild as the landscapes I drew. We'd married 7 years ago, full of hope, but those promises had been quietly shelved, replaced by the Langston family's expectations, their traditions wrapping around us like vines, choking the life we'd planned. The Langstons were old money, their name etched into Boston's history like a monument. Charles, Rebecca's father, was a real estate magnate, his stern face framed by salt and pepper hair, his eyes always narrowed, as if sizing me up. Evelyn, her mother, was a socialite, her pearls gleaming against her silk blouses, her voice smooth but cutting, like a blade wrapped in velvet. Thomas, her older brother, was a partner in the family firm, his broad shoulders and sharp suits earning him the nickname the Iron Man. Laura, her younger sister, was a pediatrician, the only Langston who treated me with kindness, her soft smile a rare warmth in their cold world. I leaned back in my chair, the wood creaking under my weight, and glanced at the clock. It was nearly 5, and Rebecca would be home soon, her footsteps sharp against the hardwood floor, her briefcase thudding on the counter. She'd changed over the years, her ambition hardening into something colder, her loyalty shifting to her family. I couldn't blame her, not entirely. The Langstons demanded allegiance, and I, with my modest background and creative career, was an outsider, a stain on their pristine legacy. I remembered the last family gathering, a Christmas dinner at their sprawling estate in Chestnut Hill. The dining room had smelled of roasted turkey and pine, the chandelier casting prisms of light across the table. Evelyn had introduced me to her friends, her voice dripping with condescension. "This is Elias, Rebecca's husband. He's just an illustrator at a small publishing house. Eventually, he'll focus more on the family." I'd forced a smile, my jaw tight, but her words had lingered, a reminder of my inadequacy. Thomas had been worse, his laugh booming as he clapped me on the shoulder, his grip too tight. "Do jobs like yours even have benefits, Elias? I mean, drawing pictures for kids, it's not exactly a man's work, is it?" His words had cut deep, questioning not just my career but my manhood, a wound that festered beneath my silence. Laura had caught my eye across the table, her expression apologetic, and later, she'd pulled me aside, her voice low. "Don't let them get to you, Elias. They're always like this." Her kindness had been a lifeline, but it wasn't enough to stem the tide of their disapproval. Rebecca had defended me at first, her hands squeezing mine under the table, but over time, her defenses weakened, her size growing sharper, her gaze avoiding mine. I'd felt it, the distance widening between us, a chasm I couldn't bridge. The fertility treatments had made it worse. We'd wanted children since we married, but 3 years ago, we'd started the injections, the appointments, the endless waiting. The Langstons had watched us like hawks, their expectations heavy. Evelyn had said it once, her voice sharp, The Langston bloodline has always been strong. We need heirs, Elias. The implication was clear. I was failing them, failing Rebecca, failing myself. The doctor had been vague, his words careful. We haven't found significant issues, but there's a possibility of unexplained infertility. I nodded, my throat tight, but the Langstons had latched onto it, their blame settling on me like a shroud. Thomas had smirked, his tone casual but cruel. Maybe it's you, Elias. Not exactly living up to the Langston standard, are you? I rubbed my temples, the memory sharp, and glanced at my reflection in the window. My brown hair showed early gray, my eyes tired, but there was still a spark there, a quiet defiance I clung to. I wasn't just an illustrator, I told myself. I was an artist, a storyteller, but in their world, that wasn't enough. I wasn't enough. The front door opened, and Rebecca's footsteps echoed, sharp and deliberate. I closed my sketchbook, the pages rustling, and stood, smoothing my sweater. She appeared in the doorway, her auburn hair pulled back, her suit crisp, her expression distant. "I'll be late tonight," she said, her voice clipped. "Client meeting." I nodded, my throat tight, and watched her disappear into the kitchen, the sound of her briefcase thudding against the counter a punctuation mark to our silence. I sat back down, my hands trembling slightly, and opened my sketchbook again. The forest scene stared back at me, its trees tangled, its shadows deep. I wondered if this was how I felt, lost in their world, my roots uprooted, my dreams fading. But I pushed the thought aside, focusing on the lines, the textures, the story I was trying to tell. I had to hold on, I told myself, to something, anything. The phone rang, pulling me from my thoughts. I hesitated, seeing Evelyn Langston on the screen, but answered, my voice cautious. "Elias, happy birthday," she said, her tone brighter than usual, almost theatrical. "Since it's a special day, I want to celebrate with you tonight. Let's meet with the whole family at Chateau Bloom at 7. I froze, my heart pounding. Chateau Bloom was one of Boston's most exclusive restaurants, a place where a single dish could cost more than my daily salary. Evelyn had never made such a gesture before, and I couldn't shake the unease. "Oh, thank you, Evelyn," but she interrupted, her voice firm. "No need to be modest. We're family. I've asked Rebecca to handle something else, so come directly to the restaurant. 7 sharp." The call ended, and I stared at the phone, my mind racing. Why such a generous invitation, and why separately from Rebecca? I called her, my fingers trembling. "Are you sure this is okay?" "Your mother suddenly," her voice was tense, clipped. "Yes, I heard from her. I'll join you later. Mother is trying to meet you halfway. Enjoy yourself." She hung up, and I sat there, the silence pressing against me, the unease growing. I looked at my sketchbook, the forest scene incomplete, its shadows darker now in the fading light. I wondered if this dinner was a chance, a new beginning, or something else entirely. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into a trap, but I pushed it aside, clinging to a fragile hope. I closed the sketchbook, the sound sharp, and stood, my resolve firm. Whatever awaited me, I'd face it, I told myself, but deep down, I knew the shadows of their legacy loomed larger than ever. I stood before the mirror in our quiet suburban home, the silence thick around me, broken only by the faint hum of the radiator. My reflection stared back, a man in his late 30s, brown hair streaked with early gray, eyes tired but hopeful. I adjusted my tie, the silk smooth under my fingers, and smoothed my suit jacket, its wool texture grounding me. The wedding ring on my left hand caught the light, its gold band a reminder of promises made, promises I still clung to, despite the distance between Rebecca and me. I took a deep breath, the air cool against my lips, and told myself this night could be different, a chance for the Langstons to finally see me, to accept me. But deep down, a knot of unease tightened in my chest, Evelyn's bright, almost theatrical tone echoing in my mind. I grabbed my keys, the metal cold against my palm, and stepped outside, the early evening air sharp with the scent of autumn leaves. The Maplewood district was quiet, its streets lined with maples, their branches swaying gently, casting shadows under the streetlights. I drove to Chateau Bloom, the hum of the engine steady, but my thoughts raced, circling Evelyn's words, Rebecca's tense tone on the phone. Why separately from her? Why now, after years of disdain? I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles pale, and tried to focus on the road, the headlights slicing through the dusk. Chateau Bloom loomed ahead, a classic stone building, its facade lit by warm lanterns, its windows glowing with golden light. I parked, the gravel crunching under my tires, and stepped out, the cool air brushing my face. The uniformed doorman nodded, his gloved hand opening the door, and I stepped inside, the scent of rosemary and wine enveloping me. The lobby was opulent, its marble floors gleaming, its chandeliers casting prisms of light across the walls, impressionist paintings lining the hallway. I felt out of place, my suit suddenly inadequate, my footsteps echoing too loudly. The middle-aged manager approached, his bow slight, his voice polished. "Welcome, sir." Name: Elias Carter. "I have a reservation at 7, under Morrison," I said, my voice steady but my heart pounding. A flicker of recognition crossed his face, and he nodded. "Ah, the Langston reservation. This way, please." He led me past the main dining area, its tables filled with well-dressed patrons, their laughter sharp, their glasses clinking. I followed, my shoes sinking into the plush carpet, the hallway narrowing, the light softening. He opened a door to a private room, its interior dimly lit, a large round table covered with a white tablecloth, elaborate flower arrangements of roses and lilies, 7 champagne glasses glinting under the chandelier. But the room was empty, the silence suffocating. "Excuse me, has everyone not arrived yet?" I asked, my voice tight, confusion rising. The manager's brow furrowed, his tone puzzled. "All the Langstons have already arrived. Please wait a moment." He closed the door, the sound sharp, and I stood there, my breath shallow, the air heavy with the scent of roses. I scanned the room, its walls paneled in dark wood, its paintings staring down, their eyes judgmental. Then I saw it, an envelope on the table, my name written in elegant script. My hands trembled as I picked it up, the paper smooth, its weight ominous. I opened it, and 2 documents fell out, fluttering to the table like dead leaves. The first was an official legal document, its words stark, black ink on white paper. Divorce papers, Rebecca's signature already there, precise and final. The second was a note in Evelyn's handwriting, its tone venomous. "Happy birthday. The defective man must go. Without you, Rebecca can have a real family." I froze, my vision blurring, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Another piece of paper slipped out, Rebecca's handwriting this time, its words colder. "I need to carry on the Langston legacy. It's no longer possible with you. I've moved out. Goodbye." The room spun, the chandelier's light fracturing, the roses' scent cloying, suffocating. I collapsed into a chair, the wood creaking under me, my hands trembling, the papers slipping to the floor. Hot tears rolled down my cheeks, their salt bitter on my lips. I touched my wedding ring, its band cold now, its weight a lie. 7 years, I thought, 7 years of marriage, of promises, of dreams, ending like this, on my birthday, in this empty room, their cruelty timed to wound deepest. I remembered our vows, spoken under a spring sky, her hand warm in mine, her eyes bright. I remembered the fertility treatments, the Langstons' blame, their words, "The Langston bloodline needs strong men," cutting into me, questioning my manhood, my worth. And now this, their final judgment, their rejection, their betrayal. "So this is how it ends," I said aloud, my voice small but firm, the air heavy around me. I stood, my legs unsteady, and wiped my tears, my fingers wet against my cheeks. But amid the shock, the sadness, another emotion rose, faint at first but growing stronger: anger. Evelyn's cruel words, Rebecca's betrayal, the fact that they'd chosen my birthday for this act, it burned in me, a fire I hadn't felt in years. I looked at the table, its flowers mocking, its champagne glasses empty, and something shifted. They thought I was defective, a failure, but I wasn't done. Not yet. I pressed the button to call the waiter, my finger trembling but resolute. A young man appeared, his uniform crisp, his expression neutral. "How may I help you, sir?" he asked. I took a deep breath, my voice steady now, my anger focused. "Who's paying for tonight's dinner?" He glanced at his notepad. "It's been prearranged on Mr. Langston's credit card." A small smile curved my lips, sharp and defiant. "In that case, I'd like to order the finest dinner course and champagne for one person." He nodded, his eyes flickering with surprise, and left, the door closing softly behind him. I returned to the table, inhaling the scent of the roses, their sweetness now bitter. I picked up the divorce papers, their weight lighter now, and tucked them into my bag, the zipper sharp in the silence. This isn't the end, I told myself, my voice quiet but firm. This is the beginning. The champagne arrived, its bubbles dancing in the glass, its golden light catching the chandelier's glow. I lifted it, the stem cool against my fingers, and took a sip, its taste sharp, its bubbles bursting on my tongue. I looked at the empty room, its shadows deep, its silence broken by the faint clink of my glass, and I felt it. A spark, a resolve, a determination I hadn't felt in years. I ate alone, the meal exquisite, its flavors rich, seared scallops, truffle risotto, chocolate soufflé, but each bite was a defiance, a reclaiming, a refusal to let them define me. I thought of Rebecca, her distant eyes, her signed papers, and I felt the weight lift, the chains loosening. I thought of Evelyn, her venomous note, and I felt the anger burn, but I channeled it, focusing it, shaping it into something new. I thought of myself, the man I'd been, the man I could be, and I knew, deep down, that this night, this betrayal, was not my end, but my beginning. I left Chateau Bloom, the cool night air sharp against my face, the stars above faint but steady. I drove home, the headlights slicing through the darkness, my resolve firm, my heart lighter. Whatever came next, I'd face it, I told myself. But for now, I carried the spark, the fire, the promise of a life reclaimed. I sat in my new apartment, the silence thick, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator. The space smelled of fresh paint and cardboard, the walls bare, the floors scuffed from the move. I'd left our suburban home behind, its memories too heavy, and taken this modest place in Boston's South End, its windows overlooking a quiet street, its shadows long in the late afternoon light. I leaned back on the couch, its fabric rough against my sweater, and stared at the stack of boxes, their labels sharp in black marker. Books, sketch pads, clothes, each a piece of the life I was trying to rebuild. The divorce had gone quickly, the Langstons' lawyer pushing for a settlement, offering me a small share of our joint property. I'd signed, my pen steady, my resolve firm, and reverted to my maiden name, Carter, shedding their legacy like a worn coat. I rubbed my temples, the ache lingering, and glanced at the clock. It was nearly 6, and the day had been long, filled with unpacking, sorting, trying to make sense of the emptiness. I thought of Rebecca, her distant eyes, her signed papers, and felt a flicker of anger, but it was softer now, tempered by time. She hadn't contacted me, hadn't apologized, as if our 7 years had been an illusion, a dream I'd woken from. I stood, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floor, and opened a box, pulling out my sketchbook, its cover worn, its pages filled with forests, stars, children's faces. I traced the lines, the graphite smooth under my fingers, and felt a spark, a reminder of who I was, who I could be. The mail arrived, the slot clattering, and I crossed the room, my socks silent on the floor. I picked up the envelopes, their paper crisp, and froze, seeing one from a law firm in Cape Cod, its address unfamiliar. I opened it, my hands trembling, and read the words, stark and surreal. Dear Mr. Elias Carter, we respectfully inform you regarding the execution of your grandmother Margaret Carter's will. My breath caught, my heart pounding. Margaret had raised me after my parents' deaths, her hands calloused, her voice gentle, her death 5 years ago a quiet wound. I'd thought her inheritance was a small savings account, a few mementos, but this letter said otherwise. Assets totaling approximately $8 million will be transferred to you through a trust fund, as per Margaret's instructions, to be disclosed at age 40. I dropped the letter, collapsing into a chair, the wood creaking under me. $8 million, I thought, the figure dancing in my head, surreal, impossible. I remembered Margaret's modest life, her small cottage in Cape Cod, its walls lined with books, its kitchen smelling of bread and tea. She'd never spoken of wealth, never hinted at investments, but now, this fortune, hidden, waiting, felt like a lifeline, a gift. I drove to Cape Cod the next day, the road winding, the ocean glinting in the distance. Jonathan Fisher, the lawyer, met me in his office, his gray hair neat, his voice calm. Edith was a wise woman, he said, his smile warm. She invested steadily from a young age, but preferred a modest life. She wanted you to carve your own path, not rely on wealth. I nodded, my throat tight, and asked, why didn't she tell me, during my marriage, my struggles? He leaned forward, his eyes kind. She added the condition about age 40, so this wouldn't affect your marriage. She wanted you to build your own life, Elias. I left, the documents heavy in my bag, the ocean air sharp against my face. I thought of the Langstons, their disdain, Evelyn's words, he's just an illustrator, from an unsuitable background, and wondered if this fortune would have changed their view. But I knew, deep down, it wouldn't. Money wouldn't shift their nature, their cruelty, and I felt a quiet relief, a release from their judgment. I decided to retest for infertility, the weight of their blame still lingering, a shadow I needed to shake. Dr. Sarah Chun, a specialist, met me in her Boston office, her voice gentle, her hands steady. Elias, she said, taking my hand, there's nothing wrong with you. Upon closer examination, the cause was on Rebecca's side, a rare genetic condition causing low egg quality. The chances of conception were slim. I froze, my vision blurring, my heartbeat pounding. They knew, she added, her tone careful. These results should have been communicated, but male infertility is often stigmatized, and families like theirs hide it to protect pride. I left, the city streets blurring, the truth sharp, liberating. They blamed me, questioned my manhood, but it was their lie, their hypocrisy, and I felt the chains loosen, the weight lift. I used part of Margaret's fortune to open Margaret's sketchbook, a children's bookstore and art studio in Beacon Hill, its stone facade warm, its windows bright. I painted the sign myself, the letters bold, the wood smooth, and filled the shelves with books, art supplies, their colors vivid. The opening was small, but local authors attended, their voices warm, their smiles genuine. I hosted art workshops, the room filled with children's laughter, their hands stained with paint, their joy a balm. Sophia Bennett, a science teacher, visited with her son, Ethan, his eyes bright, his questions sharp. We talked, her voice steady, her presence grounding, and I felt a spark, a connection, a new beginning. I stood in the studio, the scent of paint and paper filling the air, and looked out the window, the snow piling up, the streetlights glowing. I thought of Margaret, her quiet strength, her gift, and felt her presence, guiding me. I thought of Rebecca, the Langstons, their lies, and felt the anger fade, replaced by resolve. This was my life now, I told myself, my path, my legacy, and I'd build it, brick by brick, sketch by sketch. I stood behind the counter at Margaret's sketchbook, the scent of fresh paint and old books filling the air, the morning light streaming through the windows, casting shadows on the hardwood floor. The studio was quiet, its shelves lined with art supplies, its walls adorned with children's drawings, their colors vivid, their lines bold. I adjusted a stack of sketch pads, their paper smooth under my fingers, and felt a quiet pride, a sense of purpose. The past year had been a rebuilding, a reclaiming, but the Langstons lingered, their shadows faint but persistent, their cruelty a wound I'd learned to carry. I glanced at the newspaper on the counter, its headline stark, Langston Real Estate faces bankruptcy amid failed investments. I read, my eyes scanning the words, my heart steady. Charles's health had declined, his stress taking its toll, his once stern face now hollow. Evelyn had been ostracized, her social circle abandoning her, her pearls dim in the fading light. Thomas had lost his position, his Iron Man persona crumbling, his suits now ill-fitting. Rebecca's rumored engagement to a wealthy heir had fallen through, the Langstons' decline a public fall, their legacy cracking. I felt no joy, no anger, just a quiet detachment, a release from their grip. The bell above the door jingled, and I looked up, my breath catching. Rebecca stood there, her auburn hair pulled back, her suit crisp but her face tired, her eyes shadowed. She hesitated, her footsteps slow, and I felt a flicker, a memory of her laugh, her touch, but it faded, replaced by resolve. Elias, she said, her voice low, will you hear me out? I nodded, my expression calm, and gestured to a chair, its wood creaking as she Saturday, I was wrong. She began, her hands trembling, her words spilling out. I blamed you for our infertility, but it was my condition, my genetic issue. I had an affair, hoping to conceive, to prove you were the problem, but it failed. They covered it up, protected me, but I threw away the best husband for their pride. I listened, my heart swaying, anger and sadness mixing, but my face remained steady. Her confession, her affair, was a betrayal deeper than the divorce papers, a wound I hadn't expected, but I felt no shock, no rage, just a quiet release. I'm sorry, she said, her voice trembling, her eyes wet, but I stood, my resolve firm. The past is the past, I told her, my voice calm, my detachment clear. She left, her footsteps fading, and I returned to the counter, the silence settling, the sunlight shifting, its warmth faint. The bell jingled again, and Evelyn entered, her once dignified appearance gone, her hair disheveled, her eyes shadowed. Elias, she said, her voice choked, Laura's been hospitalized, a hereditary kidney disease. We've tested, but none of us are compatible. Please, help her. Would you consider getting tested? I froze, her words sharp, her desperation raw. I remembered her cruelty, her note, the defective man must go, and felt the anger rise, but I thought of Laura, her kindness, her smile, and felt a pull, a moral dilemma. I consulted Sophia, her voice steady, her presence grounding. This is about who you are, not them, she said, her hand warm on mine, and I knew, deep down, she was right. I tested, the hospital room cold, the needle sharp, and learned I was compatible. I decided to donate, my resolve firm, and told Evelyn, my voice steady. This isn't for you or your family. It's for Laura, and it's my final gift. The surgery loomed, its weight heavy, but I felt no fear, just clarity, a chance to rise above their toxicity, to define myself, not them. I woke in the hospital room, the scent of antiseptic sharp, the monitors beeping softly, their rhythm steady. My side ached, the incision tender, but I felt lighter, a weight lifted, not just from the surgery, but from the past. Laura's recovery had been swift, her gratitude warm, her smile faint but genuine. The local news had covered my donation, its headline bold, "Local hero saves sister-in-law with kidney donation," and Margaret's sketchbook had buzzed, its shelves crowded, its workshops filled. I sat up, the bed creaking, and looked out the window, the city skyline sharp, its lights glowing, and felt a quiet pride, a sense of purpose. Charles had died, his stress-related illness claiming him, his funeral quiet, his legacy crumbling. I received a letter from his lawyer, its paper crisp, its words surreal. Mr. Elias Carter, Charles Langston has left you a small inheritance, including a piece of land, with a note. You were the son I never had. I failed you. I froze, my breath catching, his words sharp, ironic. I remembered his stern face, his silence, and felt no joy, no anger, just a quiet detachment. I donated the land to a children's art program, its deed signed, its purpose clear, rejecting their legacy, defining my own. Sophia and I grew closer, her voice steady, her presence grounding, our conversations deep, our laughter warm. We adopted Ethan, her son, his eyes bright, his questions sharp, and I felt a pull, a bond, a family chosen, not born. We married in a small church, its pews filled with bookstore regulars, Sophia's family, their smiles warm, their applause soft. I wore a simple suit, its fabric smooth, and Sophia wore an ivory dress, its lace delicate, her bouquet bright. We renovated my apartment, its walls painted, its windows wide, creating a shared home, its rooms filled with art, books, laughter. We launched an infertility support group, its meetings held in the studio, its chairs filled with couples, their faces tired but hopeful. I shared my story, my voice steady, my words honest, and Sophia guided, her teaching skills sharp, her empathy deep. I felt purpose, healing, a chance to help, to connect, to redefine family, legacy, manhood. I stood in the studio, the scent of paint and paper filling the air, and looked at Ethan, his hands stained, his smile wide, and felt it, a quiet joy, a life reclaimed. I stood in the living room, the mirror reflecting my face, its lines softer now, its eyes steady. I adjusted my tie, its silk smooth, and smiled at Sophia, her pearl earrings glinting, her dress elegant, her presence grounding. Ethan bounced nearby, his suit crisp, his questions sharp, and I felt a quiet joy, a sense of wholeness. We drove to Chateau Bloom, the city lights glowing, the air cool, and I remembered that night, 2 years ago, its betrayal sharp, its pain raw. But now, I carried a new life, a new family, and I felt ready, resolved. The manager greeted us, his bow slight, his voice warm. "Welcome, Mr. and Mrs. Carter." We followed, the dining room opulent, its tables filled, its laughter soft. I noticed them, Rebecca and Evelyn, at a back table, their faces aged, their eyes shadowed. I nodded, my gesture slight, and turned to Sophia, her hand warm, Ethan's smile bright, and told her, I thought that night was the end, but it was the beginning. We ate, the meal rich, its flavors warm, and I felt it, a closure, a peace, a life reclaimed. Back at the studio, I hosted an art workshop, the room filled with children, their hands stained, their laughter loud. The bell jingled, and a woman entered, her face familiar, her voice hesitant. "Elias, I'm Claire, from college. I had a child, your son, 10 years ago. I kept it secret, but he needs help now." I froze, my breath catching, her words sharp, surreal. I consulted Sophia, her voice steady, her support warm, and met him, Daniel, his eyes bright, his question sharp, and felt a pull, a bond, a challenge. We began building, slowly, carefully, and I felt it, a complexity, a growth, a family expanding. I stood in the studio, the scent of paint and paper filling the air, and looked at Ethan, Daniel, Sophia, their smiles warm, their presence grounding. I thought of the past, its pain, its lessons, and felt no anger, no sadness, just peace, a life reclaimed, a legacy redefined. The sunlight streamed through the windows, its warmth soft, its glow bright, and I knew, deep down, this was not an ending, but a radiance, a new beginning. Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more inspiring audio stories. Stay tuned for the next one.